What is the difference between GA4 and GA3, or also known as Universal Analytics? Hi, this is Mo Hussein. I'm the founder of Data Up, where we help businesses around the world improve their customer experience so their prospects and customers buy from them and obviously keep coming back. That's a very important part of business. And obviously, one of the ways we help these businesses figure that out is through Google Analytics. So today we're talking about the difference between the new version that's coming up, which is GA4, and comparing to what the current version that exists today. So why should you care? The main thing is to understand whether or not it's something that is right for you. Ultimately, you will have to upgrade at some point when Google makes the GA3 obsolete, but for now, you still have a choice. You can, for example, run both or just one if you want to. So let's figure out what the differences are and see if it's the right thing for you. There are a lot of differences that we're not going to touch about. There are sort of nuances that it's not really right for most of us that are business owners or executives in businesses. So we're going to touch on the very sort of basic things today, and those are going to be mostly just user interface related and some things that you and I visually can see. So the first one is really the user interface. It's changed quite a bit. And I'm going to do a demo at the end of this little presentation so you can see actually the difference between the two. I'll point out a few things that'll be interesting for you, hopefully. The second difference between GA3 and GA4 is that it's privacy focused. In GA3, there are a few things that you could have done, for example, to see the user's IP. Now, a user's IP is pretty much a personal item that is to the user. For example, my IP, I don't necessarily want other people to know because it's kind of dictates where I am, right? There are a few other things that is pretty secure about it without getting too technical with that. But the main thing is to understand is GA4 basically takes that away from the website owners like ourselves and says, okay, we don't need the website owner to know what the IP is of this person. We just will tell them, potentially where they are. So for example, if I have a user, they're based in New York or California, whatever the regions or even city they are in, the Google Analytics will tell us that. In most cases, there are some reasons where other privacy things kind of come into place, and Google Analytics or Google in general will not make that public to us, which is okay. We just have to kind of go with what we are able to see. So there are other privacy things that may be present in GA4 that we're not going to touch on necessarily, but if you are in the European region or somewhere else that might have some things related to GDPR, I would look more into that and seeing how you can provide the collection of the data in a proper way for your users. Difference number three is something that we're not going to see necessarily, especially if we're not doing anything technical with Google Analytics. It's really the under the hood changes that have been made. So GA3 has been something that's been built on over time by Google. It's been, I believe, like over 10 years that they were working on it, actually more than that. And so they've been kind of putting things on top of GA3 over and over and over and improving that over time. However, what Google did was they actually just kind of built everything from scratch for GA4, and that basically makes that whole system faster, but also it creates a lot more interesting things where they've been able to do not only move everything to the cloud and kind of process that much faster in terms of the way that the website that you have sends the data to Google Analytics, but there are some other differences that are technical that exist there. If you are a little bit technical, then you may want to look into something in terms of the data model. The way the collection of the information is a little different. And I'll just give you a quick little snippet on that. So the session data and the events data that was in GA3 will now all be events essentially. So you still have the idea of a session for a user. For example, if I go to your website, I'm in that session. If I come back in 30 minutes or later on, then that's a second session. But the events and everything else that will be kind of in GA4, it's actually improved, and so that's going to be another thing. Again, if you're not technical, then no need to kind of get look into that, but it's one of the very small technical pieces outside of all the other things that have been changed. Okay, number 4 is app and web combined. So that is where we're taking the website that we have, and if we have an app, we can actually combine that together now. And you might have seen that app plus web before. Now that's kind of changed in the way that Google rebrands it, and they call it GA4. But the idea is that if you have, let's say, a mobile app on iOS or Android, etc., and then you want to combine that data with your web data, your website data, so you can do that now and put it together so you can see everything in one report. Essentially, that really helps you identify, okay, well, my users are on these platforms and they're doing XYZ things, and they're, this is what's going on based on that, right? So it helps you make those decisions faster potentially as a business. And ultimately, number 5 is the business insights that might be relevant to you. So if you're familiar with machine learning, artificial intelligence is basically using the data that you have to figure out what are the differences in this data, or what can I suggest that might help you and figure out what's going on that you may not already be aware of. There's just really a few things that might come up while you're using the system. So going back to number 1, the user interface, that's really the biggest one. So let's go take a look. Let's have a little demo. So in here we can see, for example, our GA3 on the left-hand side and GA4 on the right-hand side. Immediately we'll notice that the menu is pretty much the biggest difference, at least in this view, that you can see. The menu system in GA4 is much longer. It's got a lot more options in here, it seems. GA3, you have only 5 of these sections that's coming up here under reports. And then obviously, if you're already familiar with GA3 or using Google Analytics for a while, if you pull out this fan out here, then you'll see a lot more options, obviously. So some of that is kind of broken down in GA4 a little bit here, but this is kind of the biggest difference in the way that it looks, the Google Analytics 3 versus 4, right? So once I kind of get into it a little bit more, I can see more differences, but this is the GA3 home. This is the GA4 home here on the right-hand side. I'm going to push this button so that becomes a little bit bigger in terms of the screen. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger, so hopefully that makes it more visible for you. So in terms of the data, there are going to be some differences because of certain factors that we don't need to discuss today, but just realize that it should be fairly similar in terms of the way the numbers come up, and I'm showing you a specific data period here, but the information should be fairly similar. The home will look fairly similar for both versions, really. It's really the other reports that get quite different. But you can see, for example, like, there's this traffic information. You have your real-time user, which is also here as well. Some of the traffic information the display is a little different, but it's the same information essentially. Then you can see, for example, which country your users are coming from, right here, devices. They're pretty much the same, really. It's just kind of organized in a different fashion in GA4 versus GA3. So that part isn't really that much of a difference. So the biggest difference we've seen so far is really the menu system. And then let's take a look at a report. So I like to talk a lot about the acquisitions report. You've probably seen this a bunch of times if you've been in my workshops before. And you can see, for example, I'm showing you the source medium in the acquisitions report in GA3 on this side, on the left-hand side here, and then a similar report, pretty much the same report in this case, but the traffic acquisitions under acquisitions, that looks a little bit different in terms of the menu. Again, so the information is pretty much the same. So we have, for example, I have some people coming from Google Organic, which is, again, SEO. So we have some people coming here as well, I can see. Then we have some newsletter people coming through. Then we have some other referral sites that are present here. We have some of the same information right here, like the engaged sessions. I have more things on this menu and this section graph here on the right hand side if I wanted to take a look at that. But ultimately the information is very similar. The way it's presented is fairly similar as well. There are going to be bigger differences as you kind of go into some of these other reports in GA4. We're not going to look into that today too much. We'll do that at a different workshop so you guys have a more in-depth experience with GA4 so you understand it a little bit better. The last thing I will show you is the admin panel because that's changed quite a bit as well. In the admin panel, you can obviously find in the very bottom where the gear button is. Once you click on that, you'll see GA3 admin panel, and this is how it looks in GA4. The view section that you see on the GA4 is no longer present in GA4. That's because of the way they've made some changes. You won't see an actual view anymore. So if you're not familiar with that, when you are using GA3, you would have had some options to create additional views if you wanted to. If you're not using that, really doesn't matter. Just forget about it. And in the GA4, you won't have that view option really. So whatever you see here is pretty much it. There are some specific differences in some of these things. Like the idea of data streams is very new. So I'll explain that the next time we talk about it. But really, that is some of the main differences. Some of the menus have changed. Their machine learning and things like that are a little bit updated in the GA4. And so going back to that point, actually, GA3 had this insights idea as well, but it's improved in GA4. So I'm back in the home of my GA4 and GA3 on the left-hand side, but we won't focus on GA3 too much. So I can see that, for example, I'm in home. I have this insights here. And in the insights, I can see, for example, there are some things that Google Analytics is telling me for the differences that that exists. So for example, event count spiked yesterday. Maybe there are some more people on my website. They're doing certain things that I'm collecting information on. For example, button clicks, right? So if there are more people doing that, Google Analytics will let me know that. I can also click on this insights here, and it'll suggest some things for me. I can say, okay, I want to see other suggestions, questions, etc. I'm curious about maybe the most common browsers that my users are using, just because I want to develop based on some for some browsers. So for example, I can see that Chrome seems to be where most of my customers, clients that are visiting my website are. I can also see something different. Maybe I want to know, let's see, the demographics, right? So which countries do most of my users come from? If I click on that, it will show me United States is where most of my customers are. We can see some other countries that people are visiting my website from, right? That's all good. Now, this information is sort of the machine learning things that are behind the scenes that you won't need to do anything for. It just automatically happens for you. And these things you see on this here suggestion questions, that basically tries to take you away from having to look at the report, especially if you're not familiar with it as much. Then look at this insights only and answer some basic questions. Obviously, as you're digging more into your analytics and things like that, you might need to know more about the Google Analytics information. So you'll need to look at the reports, but just kind of basic things that might be helpful as you're moving into GA4. So hopefully those differences are clear to you and that makes sense. And just a quick fun fact, this icon here, this is the GA3 icon, and this is the new icon that you might see on your browser. That's the GA4 icon. And so the last question that some of you might be asking, well, that's great. I like some of these things. Should I switch now? The answer is kind of really depends on you. So GA4 is technically still in the beta version. It's not ready for, prime time, as they say. But you can actually run both GA3 and GA4 at the same time on your website. For example, the data that you're seeing, that's coming from my website actually. And I have both GA3 and 4 installed, so I can see both of them together. The benefit there is that you can see both of them together, but also you can get used to it. So if you're not, normally using Google Analytics as much, or if it's just very new to you, it might help to get some runway time before Google Analytics says, hey, you can't use GA3 anymore, you have to switch to GA4. It might help to do that. Although Google hasn't said when that time will be, I imagine it can't be within a year because they'll have to give people enough time to kind of move over. But you might still want to switch and see some of take advantage of some of the new features like the insights, the machine learning kind of stuff. So if you want to install Google Analytics 4 already before we are, getting into it probably at the end of the year at this point with new workshops and kind of getting more used to it, etc., then I will be doing another video where you can see how to install GA4 if you already have GA3. So hopefully that was helpful in understanding what the differences are for GA3, GA4 versus GA4, and let me know if you have any questions. Have a great day.